Welcome to Avatar State of Mind, a podcast exclusively dedicated to the universe of Avatar The Last Airbender. From The Last Airbender to Legend of Korra and the comic books in between, this is your number one stop for Avatar content. I'm your host, Sam DeCoste, and I am joined by my friend Aaron Miller to spend the next 30 minutes with you talking about Zuko's honor, underground libraries, the Air Nomad civilization, and so much more. So sit back, grab a cup of tea from the Jasmine Dragon, and enjoy the show. This is Avatar State of Mind. We're back for another show, Avatar State of Mind, our third show already. Can you believe it, Aaron?
No, this has really flown by.
It's been an incredible ride so far, but thank you once again for spending time with us as we talk to you in our weekly discussion about everything Avatar. So today we're going to do something different. We're going to begin our series-long recap of Avatar The Last Airbender by spending each episode talking about individual chapters. Originally, when we envisioned creating this podcast, we wanted to start off by introducing ourselves, what this podcast was going to be, and just get acquainted with the program, with the platform, before diving right into our new structure. But the structure of the show from now on, going forward, is going to be a guided discussion of every episode in Avatar in order from books 1 to 3, from the Boy in the Iceberg, all the way up to Sozin's Comet. Every chapter along the way is captivating in its own way, and Aaron and I have said a long time that we could go for hours talking about Avatar and the Avatar universe, and this way, in this structure, we get to do that just over a very prolonged period of time in these podcasts. So Aaron and I, what we want to do with this is to relive the Avatar journey together with you and have some fun along the way. So today we're going to begin our journey. We're going to talk about the first two chapters of Avatar, The Boy in the Iceberg and The Avatar Returns. So before you listen any longer, let this be your spoiler warning. Do not listen to the show today unless you have listened to both the first two episodes of Avatar. Aaron and I are going to do our best to keep our summary to chapters 1 and 2 without branching forward too quickly. But Aaron and I will definitely probably get ahead of ourselves in the show, so be warned because we love the show that much. So there is your spoiler alert. And now that that's out of the way, let's dive right in. So every great show really has to establish the story very clearly, and the Avatar universe is highly complex, and Book 1 is mostly spent on creating this world and explaining it to us. We learn that the world is divided into 4 nations of 4 elements: water, earth, fire, and air. And we learn that the world was at peace for a long time, but in times of division and war, it was the Avatar who was the master of all 4 elements, and they protected the world from danger and from war. But 100 years ago, when the Fire Nation attacked, as Katara so eloquently puts it, the Avatar vanished, and the Fire Nation are nearing victory in the war, and the world is starved of hope and desperate for a hero. Sorry to be cliche, but that's what Katara says. And we see Katara, who introduces this world to us, and they were left behind in the Southern Water Tribe by the men of the tribe to fight in the war. And we see this image of Sokka holding Katara, holding a light, flanked by the entire South Pole, all visibly hopeless, scared, and tired. And the men of the tribe, led by Hakoda, have been gone for 2 years, and there seems to be no hope for the South Pole or for peace as they knew it, or as they used to know it. And then, after that beautiful intro, the curtain drops, and we are finally introduced to Sokka and Katara. We have Sokka, a teenage warrior who is a non-bender hunting for fish with her sister Katara, and Katara is the only waterbender left in the South Pole. And even then, we rewatched these episodes, Aaron, and one thing I keep forgetting is that Katara started out as a novice. She knew nothing about waterbending.
Yeah, she honestly, she knew nothing. That, like, when she got angry, she couldn't control herself, and that's the reason why Aang was released from the iceberg, because she couldn't control herself, because we're going to go into this, how sexist Sokka was in his comments.
And that's what I was going to talk about as well. Sokka was very sexist at the beginning of this series. It comes up a little more when they go to Kyoshi Island, but it's very prominent in the first episode especially. One of his lines, when they were fishing originally, Katara caught a fish with waterbending, but Sokka poked it out with his staff, and they were at odds with each other. He said, "Leave it to a girl to mess things up." and that's what triggered Katara to go nuts and let her emotions control the iceberg, and then ultimately let Aang out of the iceberg.
Yeah, and honestly, like Sokka with his sexist comments, I think it goes all the way back to the fact that he's the only man in the entire tribe. Saying that he's 16 years old, so saying that he's a man is kind of a little too much, but he's the oldest guy there for 2 years, so it's absolutely crazy that even though he's been around women like his entire I'm gonna call it an adult life, even though he's only 16, he still doesn't understand. And I think that leads into especially the Kyoshi Island episode we're going to talk about next time. So
Also, thinking about the sibling relationship between Sokka and Katara, it's not very important. It's not treated as an important storyline in Avatar because there's so much going on. But initially, it was very much in the spotlight, and you could say that maybe the Avatar was what saved their relationship, because Katara, before she went nuts with the water, she said, "I'm done helping you. From now on, you're on your own." Going nuts on Sokka, just screaming at him. I wonder if they never found Aang, maybe they just would have had a very tumultuous relationship from then on.
yeah, honestly, I think that if they didn't find Aang, I definitely think that would have happened.
And so then they find Aang, and also before they find Aang, also I find this very interesting. Because Katara is the only waterbender left in the South Pole, it's as if her powers aren't even revered, as they're more so ridiculed, if that makes sense. Sokka put it as playing with magic water, when honestly, for Katara, it was a tool for survival, finding food. Katara trying to learn waterbending and trying to master the element, being undermined by Sokka, seemingly not really getting much encouragement or support from her family or the South Pole. I think that's something that stood out to me when I rewatched this episode.
Yeah, I think it has to relate back to the fact that the only waterbender Sokka knew his entire life was Katara. He was never like his first bender, not even waterbender. He had never seen a bender before this, except for maybe the firebenders and hearing stories about their destruction and everything. So to him, bending is just this like fantasy item that he reads about and he hears stories about.
And he can never do it because he's a non-bender. And then we see Aang, we see the beaming light, the Avatar is returned, and then, of course, we see Prince Zuko, the banished prince of the Fire Nation, just happen to be sailing in the South Pole. And he just happens to be at the right place at the right time, and nobody else was. He's been traveling for 3 years at this point. And also, like Katara, Zuko was very much a novice at firebending himself. He could not master his own basics. We see Iroh getting frustrated with Zuko, trying to teach him firebending. He says firebending is with the breath, not the muscle. It's something that Zuko struggles with all the way until Book 3, and we know what episode that was. But even back then, Zuko thought, and mostly the entire Fire Nation, minus Iroh, feels that fire is an extension of rage and power. When in reality, when Iroh is teaching him, he's trying to instill that fire is life. It's not destruction.
I think the most interesting thing about all that is everything you just said. I mean, the fact that Iroh is going against like the philosophy of firebending and trying to teach Zuko that, and Zuko rejecting it because he grew up his entire life thinking he had to be angry about everything. What I also found interesting, because I just rewatched these episodes this morning, is when Iroh said that to Zuko, he was playing some type of card game. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I don't think we ever see that card game ever again played in the show. Because whenever you see Iroh, you see him playing Pai Sho. This isn't an important fact, but I found that so cool that he was playing a game that was never brought up again.
I noticed that too. That was what he was playing when Zuko said, "Set a course for the light. The Avatar is returned." But again, Zuko struggling to understand that firebending is an extension of your energy and life out as fire. But then we see this boy rise from the iceberg, some 12-year-old kid dressed as a monk with an arrow on his head, who sneezes and jumps 10 feet in the air. And apparently he's an airbender, and airbenders were thought to be extinct back 100 years ago. Nobody has seen an airbender in a very long time. And Katara when they're on Appa and Appa's not even flying yet, where they're just, in the water getting back to the village, Katara asked Aang, did you know the Avatar? And Aang lied. Aang said he knew people that knew him. He didn't say he was the Avatar, and he knew he was the Avatar. But Aang lied. And that also, it shows we see his insecurities very much as the show progresses, but he was very insecure about being the Avatar. He never wanted to be the Avatar, and he lied about it. And that also translated, because before everyone else found out, he was treated in the South Pole like an alien, like a threat or a spy from the Fire Nation.
Yeah, and honestly, for Aang, the interaction he had with Sokka and Katara, in his own head, happened not even 8 hours after he had last seen Monkey Otso.
He took a nap.
Yeah, he took a nap, and it just happened to be 100 years. So,
and then we see a flashback to the storm, which we learn a lot about later in the show. Then we see the Southern Water Tribe, and I counted, there are 21 people total in that tribe, including Katara and Sokka. 10 of them are kids, the other 11 are adults, and it's a barren Arctic wasteland. There's no semblance of a structured society or civilization there. It's just ice and some huts. And we learn a lot about the North Pole later on, but this is a tribe completely disconnected from their sister tribe culturally and diplomatically.
Yeah, and you can also see how close the tribe actually is to the ocean. I mean, obviously they're on the frozen ocean, but when the ships come in later on, Zuko's ships to invade in the next episode, they don't have to go that far from where they were in the open ocean. So you can see how close they were to the ocean itself. Definitely proves how much they relied on fishing and like going all the way back to like being a tribal society, even though there were established cities all over the entire world.
So then after Aang and Katara go penguin sliding, they find this abandoned ship, which, by the way, I believe, and I'm not sure if this has been thrown out and you've heard about this rumor, but in the episode The Puppet Master, when we learn about Hana, is it the other waterbender from the South Pole, when the Fire Nation invaded the South Pole 85 years prior, that was one of the ships.
Yeah, it's actually shown in the episode.
Yeah. It's not definitively stated as the ship from The Boy in the Iceberg, but
the way it goes up.
Yeah. So they go into this ship, which is 85 years old, at least from when it was used to invade, and obviously Katara knew it was there. She said how it was a scar of a very scary and low point for their village and their history. But Aang peer pressures Katara into going in, looking around, and this is when Aang learns about the war, because he thought he was taking a nap, but 100 years later he wakes up and there's a war going on. He's the last airbender, he's the Avatar, and now he needs to save the world. He thought he was asleep for a few days maybe, but he was in the iceberg for 100 years, and then things started to unravel. Now, this is kind of amusing to me, and I don't really understand this, but how is it that a ship that was used for an invasion 80 years ago would be scattered with booby traps that would still be functioning, and the booby trap that Aang happened to set off fired a booming light out of the ship that would signal Prince Zuko 85 years later to go to the South Pole and find him?
Yeah, I mean, you and I have talked about this before, and I also find it so interesting, but I think that everything is still active on the ship, because you know how Katara didn't want to go to the ship at all, and she was trying to convince Aang, please don't, let's not do this, and Aang just pushed forward. It has to be some kind of thing in their society that it's just like, don't go there. You know how in The Lion King, when Mufasa's talking to Simba, he's like, that's everything the light touches except for that area over there. And I think that ship is like, you can go everywhere, just don't go there. And all the booby traps still being active proves that no one has ever been to that ship ever since it was put up in the sky, like put up onto the ice. So I think that's the reason why, but it is quite a coincidence that it shot a light into the sky.
I mean, not to like beat a dead horse, but I just don't understand why would even the Fire Navy put in a booby trap or multiple booby traps into a ship when it was their own, and then why a booming light? Because because that played right into Zuko's hands when they found him. But yeah, it's very interesting to me how that transpired. And that's the boy in the iceberg. And the Avatar Returns is the second part of this in this pilot sequence. And when they go back to the village after looking in that ship, Aang is banished on the spot by Sokka in the village, and Sokka is pretty much running the ship for this. So it's his decision that Gran pretty much agrees with. Yes, I think it's right that the Airbender leaves with his bison and just goes away. So Aang says he's going to go back home, and this is also very interesting. He remarks how he hasn't cleaned his room in 100 years, and he's not looking forward to that talk with the monks. And this goes back to the innocence that Aang still has that is obviously tarnished in the next episode. But it's amazing how even something as small as not cleaning his room, he's worried about the talk he's going to get from the people that guard him at the air temple when he goes home. Because even at this point, he knows he's been asleep for 100 years and that the world is engulfed into a huge war. But despite all that, Aang still believes everything is the way he left it, including Monkey Atso and all of his airbender friends, even after a century.
Yeah, this has to relate back to his teachings. I mean, the monks taught him to believe that, to be peaceful towards other people, and that I don't think Aang ever, because he's only 12 years old, and he's never seen war until now. And at this point that we're talking about specifically, he hasn't even seen the war yet. He only saw a ship.
But then we see Zuko and the Fire Nation invade because Zuko saw the light. He saw the booming light that came out of the iceberg, so he was still on his way. But once he went into the Fire Navy ship, that was what broke the camel's back. That's what got him over to the South Pole. And Zuko knew the Airbender was there, and it's been suspected. Zuko was very adamant about the fact that the Avatar is probably a very old man, been in hiding for 100 years, and Zuko even goes up to Gran and holds her, saying about this age, master of all four elements. Even in the movie, which we don't talk about, when Zuko invades the Fire Nation, he says, "Bring me all of your elderly." It's a very minor detail, but they expect the Avatar to be this very old man because he's been in hiding for a century. And that's what makes it even more shocking when it's just some kid. And then Zuko was threatening this innocent village with kids, elderly, with the eldest male being Sokka, who was pretty harmless. The only thing that triggered Zuko really, or even made him upset, was when the boomerang hit him in the helmet. But then Aang agrees to go with Zuko to leave the village alone, so the village is left safe. And then this is the first, even it's only the second episode, but Zuko already has the Avatar in his palms. He has him, and Zuko says, "I'm going home." Set a course for the Fire Nation. He's excited at the prospect that he's finally going to be regaining his honor, that he will have found the Avatar pretty much on a jackpot, that he happened to be at the right place at the right time and found the Avatar. And he had Aang right in the palm of his hands, and Zuko let him go. Zuko underestimated Aang. There was a moment where Zuko says how, "Oh, this staff will make a great gift for my father. I suppose you don't know much about fathers, being raised by monks." And then Zuko sets Aang off with his soldiers, where they're responsible for taking Aang into imprisonment. Why didn't Zuko do it? Zuko was pretty careless with Aang, to be honest, on this ship.
Yeah, and Zuko is only like 14 years old, right? And I mean, Aang is 12. I think Zuko has been treated like he's been at the bottom of society for 3 years now. And even when he was in the Fire Nation, he was still treated pretty low, even though he was the son of the Fire Lord, his crown prince. And I think he finally found somebody who wasn't part of his own crew, who he can like put down and honestly just say he was better than. But Aang had his tattoos. He was a proven air nomad master. He was a master airbender, and Zuko wasn't anything close to a master firebender. So he definitely did underestimate him.
And I can't believe, even though he was the Avatar, even though he was 12 years old, Zuko completely underestimated this kid. And then you see Aang single-handedly escape a Fire Nation ship. For most of it, he was handcuffed. He evades soldiers with his breath, with his agility, running on walls, and somehow gets out. And then it really shows how powerful of a kid this guy is, even though he is a 12-year-old guy who doesn't know any other elements except for air. And he is a master. At this point, it goes without saying, but Aang is the most powerful bender, even in the second episode. Even though he's not a fully realized avatar, you have Katara, who doesn't know what she's doing as a waterbender yet. You have Sokka, who is a half-baked warrior. That's all he is because he can't bend. That's all he says that he can do. And he has a boomerang. And Zuko, even as the prince, is pretty pathetic at firebending. He's not very good at firebending for most of the series until he meets the dragons in Book 3. We'll get to that much later on. But then we also see, and this got you in trivia last week, this is the first time that Aang enters the Avatar state. It's not the Southern Air Temple. It's on the ship when Aang enters the Avatar state for the first time. And this is when he shows everyone, including Katara and Sokka, that he is not to be underestimated.
No, yeah, and the power that this kid had in the Avatar state was just absurd. I mean, coming from somebody who was seeing this episode from the first time, I watched this show with my sister over the summer, and her seeing the power of this little kid in all of a sudden, just like out of nowhere, his eyes went bright white, his tattoos lit up, and this just got me excited when I was a kid watching this show. This proved that it wasn't just like this fantasy thing of like I can bend, I can move water with my hands. Like, it shows that there's one person who can do it all and just has this ultimate power.
And this even has Zuko trembling on his knees when he sees Aang in the Avatar state. He didn't even know how to waterbend yet, but the Avatar state saved him when he was nearly drowning. And it was an amazing display of waterbending and just all-out power for a very young Avatar. And he shouldn't have even known he was the Avatar yet. He's only 12 years old. And as the Avatar universe says, he would have found out he was the Avatar normally at age 16, but with the war beckoning, the monks had to warn him very early. And it even shows Katara and Sokka. This kid is not some bloke who can just sneeze and jump in the air. This is the Avatar.
It also shows the first time that Aang lied to Katara and Sokka, and then they found out about it. I mean, this happens a few times, but it's not that monumental in the entire series. But it shows that Aang, he wants to paint a good picture for himself, and he when he denied that he knew about the Avatar, he said that he knew people who knew him, and he even say he knew him even though he was. This really shows that Aang will do anything to make the people he cares about and the people that are around him feel better.
What I find very amusing about this episode, because it's very early in the show, it's the first two episodes. There's obviously not a lot to go on yet, and it's not. These two are far from the best episodes in the series. That's very clear. What I really enjoyed at the end was because if you remember, Iroh was pretty much asleep this whole time. He was in his chamber. He wanted nothing to do with this because he was an old lazy man. He just wanted to go sleep in his chamber. And Iroh wakes up and he just sees soldiers frozen on his ship. He sees Zuko clinging to an anchor, and then after that, the Avatar state, and Aang escapes on Appa, and then he pretty much puts the ship, and they're stuck in ice. What Iroh says is, "Great news for the Fire Lord. The Fire Nation's greatest threat is just a little kid." And it's very sarcastic because at that point they're stuck in ice, they're trapped. But even though he's a little kid, Iroh knows this is the Avatar and he's here to stay. Like the Fire Nation has some problems. The Fire Lord will not be pleased.
I'm also a huge fan of how they downplayed Iroh's ability as even a firebender and as a master of everything in this episode. Yes, he had really good advice for Zuko in the previous episode about having to learn firebending not through anger but through his own breath. But him sleeping during this huge sequence just shows that he's kind of like this comedic relief character, but he's also like that grandfather who always gives you advice and everything when you need it.
And this is the beginning of the first major arc in the series. There are a lot of these, but the first arc, and what Avatar was originally, was a quest to go to the North Pole, travel across the world, find Aang a water-bending master, and Katara can learn with Aang. And so they go out to the North Pole, and they go out to learn waterbending, and that is the beginning of their first journey as Team Avatar, and that is the beginning of the show as we know it, flying on Appa, going on adventures, meeting a new village every episode, and that really sets the tone for what the show becomes, and obviously it gets much better from here, and we have to start with these episodes because they are the first ones. But I did enjoy rewatching these because there are a lot of things that you pick up on as an adult. I think this show is incredible because it ages amazingly as an adult before when you watched it as a kid, and noticing all the little jokes that Iroh says, or just noticing how Katara and Zuko were very much beginners in their respective elements when the show began. There's just so much to go off of.
Mm. Yeah, and just going back to the beginning of this when we talked about these two episodes obviously don't contribute a whole lot to the overarching story. I mean, yes, it establishes everything, but we had to put these two together because they really do act as one. These could have even been one episode, to be completely honest. So,
and with that, Team Avatar flies to the other side of the world to teach Aang waterbending. All right, that is our first recap. That is our first guided discussion of Avatar episodes. We have chapters 1 and 2 in the books. That was fun, Aaron.
Yeah, that was a good time.
So we'll be back with you next week, and we'll talk about the Southern Air Temple. And we're not sure if we're going to do one episode for that episode, or if we're going to do 2 in 1. So if we would do the Southern Air Temple and the Kyoshi Warriors in 1, we're not sure yet, but we will figure it out.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in both those episodes, but we just want to make sure that we don't drag out this podcast, and we want to make sure that we put episodes together that make sense. And to be honest, I don't think those two make sense. So
they don't really connect very much. They're both their own episodes, and they both set the story in their own ways. So we'll talk about that during the week, but I'm excited for what this is going to be. This is our first episode recap, and this is going to progress. We're going to do this for a whole Avatar series. Beyond that, we'll probably do Legend of Korra as well, maybe the comics, the Kyoshi novels. So we'll definitely see about that.
Yeah, that's one thing I still have to get Sam to do, read those Kyoshi novels.
This will buy me time. This show will buy me time. But that is it for episode 3.
Thank you so much for listening to this second episode of Avatar State of Mind. We will be back every Saturday with a new show around noon Eastern Time. Subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at Avatar State of Mind and on Twitter at AvatarSOM. And let us know what you want us to talk about on the next show. As much as this podcast is our podcast, we are doing this for the listeners. Let us know where you want us to take this show and what you'd like us to talk about. We're in this together. For Sam DeCoste, my name is Aaron Miller, and thank you once again for joining us on Avatar State of Mind.
Mm-hmm.